We've got our quality control time working overtime hours these days. Someone's taking a break over there. But we just got in three really interesting, unique apple trees from a farm in southern Illinois called Heritage Fruit Farms. We've got Esopus Spitzenberg, Calville Blanc, which is a French dessert apple from the late 1700s, and Orleans Renette, which is another French variety. And what this farm does is it sells heirloom varieties that aren't mainstream and tries to preserve them, which is a really admirable and unique thing. So here, G969 is the rootstock I chose. The way that fruit trees are usually grown is by graft. And what that means is, you can see here's the graft. Here's actually the grafting tapes too. There's a rootstock, and you choose the rootstock usually based on your environment. So the rootstock is going to determine the size of the plant. It's going to determine its susceptibility or resistance to different disease and insects. So here in the South, there's a lot of fire blight. So you want to get a rootstock that's resistant to fire blight. And I also chose a rootstock that's semi-dwarf. And semi-dwarf is going to be like a 12-foot to 15-foot tall tree as well as width. And it's actually the maximum amount of fruit per foot. It's the most efficient root. You can get dwarf or you could get standard, but I've been trying to do semi-dwarf. So that's the rootstock that I chose. And like I said, you want to choose that based on the environment. Here's the graft. So basically 2 pieces are merged together. And then the top part is what they call the scion. Now the scion is the part that bears the fruit. So the scion, this is a scion from another Orleans Renette, and it was put together with a G969 rootstock to give me this little apple tree. And I have to say, this is the first time I've ordered from this company, and I'm really impressed because the roots look really healthy. They're really fibrous. When I've gotten other trees from other companies, these are a lot drier, and when they come in, you want to make sure that you have a damp paper towel or some way to keep them moist before they go in the ground. But these are really healthy roots. I'm going to keep them in the plastic here, add a little bit of water, and hopefully get them out in the next couple days. But here's the big box that they come in. And so yeah, overall, so far I've been really impressed. And you can see on the tips, there's already a couple leaves coming. And here's all the buds for other ones. So here we are on Thanksgiving Day, going to plant the apples in the ground. And I'm in between dinners at friends, and I didn't change, and I really should have because now I'm filthy. But in any event, here we go. So the 3 trees have been soaking in a bucket of water for about an hour. And when you order bare root trees, it's good practice to let them soak for about an hour or so that the roots will be nice and saturated with water before they go in the ground. So here we've got our Esopus Spitzenberg. It's the rootstock G969. So here's the rootstock. Here's where the graft is, and then here's the scion. And so the biggest thing when you're planting is you want to make sure, and these are actually longer rootstocks than I'm usually seeing. So when you plant them, you dig your hole. They're like a pH of about 6 to 7, nice and loamy. And the biggest thing is you want to make sure that the graft point is not under the ground, right? So I've added some horse manure, I've added some compost. You're going to add your soil, and then you're going to do what they call tamp down. And tamp means you add a little soil at a time and you press it to make sure all the roots are submerged. And you want it nice and tight in there. So we're going to keep pushing down. It's kind of interesting because I was recently watching Ken Burns's series Nashville, and it turns out that A.P. Carter, the head of the Carter family, was a traveling salesman selling fruit trees in southwestern Virginia in a place called Poor Valley. And he was going door to door selling fruit trees in the area, and he knew how to play the fiddle. And he was going over some mountain, door to door, on foot at the time in the early 1900s, and he heard this woman singing from her porch. And it was a woman named Sarah Doherty, who apparently had this incredibly beautiful voice. So he married her, and then his brother, AP's brother, married Maybelle Carter, right? And Maybelle was the one who ended up having June Carter. But AP, his brother, Sarah, and Maybelle were kind of the first Carters, and then they went to a record place in Bristol. I think it was some crazy trade, like they borrowed somebody's car in exchange to weed their cornfield. And Ken Burns explains it better than I. But it's kind of interesting because you think about, they really started country music as we know it. The Appalachian bluegrass and Maybelle being the mother of June. And you wonder, I guess, if he wasn't selling fruit trees, which I guess was kind of what, like the equivalent of Tinder at the time, which I think I think that's a much better type of Tinder, as you go selling fruit trees to people and not swiping. But who knows? I mean, who knows what would have happened if that didn't happen without fruit trees? So I think we can thank trees not only for fruit and nutrition, but maybe for the music that we hear today. So anyways, you're going to tamp it down, pressing it hard. And there you go. That's it. Here's the graft above ground. I've got probably 6 inches underground. I mean, that's a longer rootstock than I see usually. So I might build it up a little bit here. And that's really it. I'm gonna water them in good. When you're choosing varieties, down here in the South, like I've said, we're in a 7A. And there's 2 things to really consider when you're talking about fruit trees, especially apples. One is called chill hours, and chill hours means the amount of hours that the plant needs to go into dormancy. And then plants go into dormancy and then they'll set bloom when they come out, or set blooms, which become the fruit when they come out. And so chill hours means hours between, I think it's 32 degrees and 45 degrees Fahrenheit. Now in the South, there's shorter winters, so you want to choose plants that have low chill hours. If you're in the North, it's the opposite. So one thing I learned kind of the hard way is, certain varieties just aren't cut out for the South. I mean, it seems pretty obvious, but a lot of things you have to kind of learn the hard way. So you want to really pay attention to what they call chill hours. And then the other thing is, a lot of fruit plants are not self-pollinating, so you need different varieties in order to cross-pollinate to have really healthy fruit. Now, in apples at least, there's early, middle, and late varieties. So if you're going to pay attention to different pollinators and varieties, it does no good to have like an early apple and a late apple because they won't bloom at the same time, meaning they won't pollinate at the same time. So when you're choosing your varieties, you need to make sure that they're either both early, both middle, both late, etc. I've probably got, I don't know at this point, too many, probably 20 apple trees, maybe not, maybe like 15. But in any event, I have enough that are going to cross-pollinate each other. So chill hours and the varieties, the bloom time, so that you can figure out cross-pollinating. I can't recall any self-pollinating apples off the top of my head, but that's another good thing to check out. And that's it. So we've got our Spitzenberg planted. These are going in a row, and I'll do another video of it another time, but these are going to actually create a living wall. And we're going to do a thing called espalier, the branches when they come out. But that'll be another episode about structure. So now that we got the trees in the ground, I'm going to talk you through the trellising system I chose for my apple trees and why. Now I'm from the Northeast, and up in the Northeast, apples are a big deal. There's a lot of commercial apple tree farms, and they grow in order to produce maximum yield. And in those systems, a lot of times you'll hear about what is called a tall spindle trellising system. Sometimes also there's a vertical access system, but everything I've read, they're very, very similar, if not the same. And with that kind of growing system, you could get about 1,000 apple trees on 1 acre, which is really incredible. You need to use dwarf rootstocks. It's limited to certain varieties, but that's an incredible amount of trees in a small space. Now here, I'm not doing that. Here, I want my orchard to feel very whimsy, to feel very natural. I'm not trying to produce a lot commercially to sell. I just want the experience of a beautiful orchard and to come out and pick fruit myself. But when I read about those systems, there were some attributes that I thought would be worth borrowing. So here we have a Crimson Crisp apple tree, and this is on a semi-dwarf rootstock. So that all automatically takes me out of the game of tall spindle. And we'll just go through over what we talked about in the last video. As a reminder, here's our graft point. It's got to be a few inches above the ground because it's very weak. You can see here where the rootstock and the scion meet, and this is a spot of prime vulnerability for the plant, so it's got to be above the ground. Then around the roots, I did a simple weed mat. You can see right here. I just cut that from a big roll, and then I had a tree company dump a pile of wood chips here for free. that they needed to get rid of. So nurseries are going to want to sell you these tree rings for like 10 to 20 bucks, but you can do it for a lot cheaper. I recommend that route if you can. This is supposed to protect the trunk, and I think I wasted my money. I also got it with a weed whacker pretty good. And then here is a netting. It's actually a bird net, but I figured, you know, I'll try it now for deer, and until I can afford to put a true orchard fence in, that's what I'll use. So getting back to the trellis system, you'll see here, I've got my T-post, I've got my cattle panel, and I attached it with just very simple wire. Now, with apple trees and pear trees, most of them are grown with what they call a central leader system. Central leader means one main stem that, you know, that goes up and down the tree. You don't have like two stems, because then that compromises the integrity of the tree when you've got two growing. You really want one. That's your central leader. Now, in the tall spindle system and the vertical axis, they basically use wire as a way to create support and structure for the tree, and they prune away a lot of the different smaller branches. And the branches that are left, they train on the wire. I'll use baler twine here in late spring and attach the wire, attach the branches to the wire. And that way, you only have a few limbs, but the limbs are supposed to be very productive. And I think what happens by weighting those branches down, which is highly recommended on everything I've read about apples, is I think it makes the plant believe that there's fruit already on the branches, and that's the weight bringing it down. And it does something with promoting more flower growth. I don't know the term, but of course the flower is what becomes the fruit, which is what we eat. So I don't know how this is going to work. Like I said, in late spring, I've got to do my pruning, and I'm going to get these, you know, a few branches. I'm going to use the wire here to tie them down. It's going to be very similar to the French term espalier, that horticulture term. And it'll be, I think, really interesting to see how it goes. Now, I'm going to do a couple apple trees here with no system like this, and those can be the control. I may try a couple pear trees because they grow similarly, but I'm not sure. And this is also December 21. It's the shortest day of the year, and we're getting a real cold spell tomorrow. So hopefully all my little trees make it, and we'll see in a few months, you know, what's going to work and what's not.